Then to just share briefly about renewable energy work in Africa, but more specifically in terms of what WRI has been doing in the context of global lab conversation. So I guess, whereas I'm not going to be focusing a lot more on generally about renewable energy more broadly, I felt it's more important to, I think, contextualize a conversation and share with you in terms of what is WRI doing in the continent of Africa around clean energy, both in terms of transition, the opportunities for transition, as well as for delivering access to clean energy for more than 500 million people who still don't have access to clean energy in the continent, and more specifically in sub-Saharan Africa. So I think you can see I've basically structured or defined my presentation as catalyzing Africa's clean energy transition and access. And I think before I just get into that presentation, just to share with you who WRI is, for the sake of those who do not know who WRI is, so we are a global research organization that works very closely with government, businesses, multilateral institutions, civil society organizations, and then mainly in terms of shaping policies around around nature and development, at the nexus of environment and development, I think more specifically. Our work is organized around what we call 7 global challenges, as you can see them there, which is food, forest, water, energy, climate, ocean, and cities. And again, I think as we do this work, we basically focus our analysis around 4 what we call centers of excellence, which are business, economic, finance, and equity. And I think just to explain here, the conviction that we have is, for example, if you want to sort out the challenges facing energy sector, there is a business component to it, and you definitely have to understand what is a business angle or what is a business influence in terms of both driving access as well as transition to clean energy. And the same case for economics. There's so much around economics of energy transition, economics of energy access, and so we also apply the lens of economics as we do the work, each of the pieces that we do. And the same case for finance and equity. And I think equity, of course, here, more specifically, is that as we do all the issues that we want to address, let's not leave anyone behind. And let's not come up with solutions that, for example, may affect part of the communities probably negatively. Our approach to work is what we call, it's a 3-pronged approach, count it. So basically starting with data and analysis, then change it. So of course, informed by the research and analytics that we conduct. What is the change supposed to look like? And once we implement the change, then how do we scale that up, whether at the national, global, regional level? Now, more specifically, I think in terms of the energy work, it's organized. Our energy work is organized along 3 pillars. So clean energy transition, which we all know about, efficiency work. This is panning out beyond just building efficiency. We started with building efficiency, but now this is actually getting into other sectors of efficiency. And then finally, access work, which is what I lead in Africa, and which is where actually I think energy access is more strong. Now, I wonder why this thing is not, okay. So I guess that's basically again around the work in Africa. So down there, so I think as you can see, the vision is you want to catalyze inclusive transformation so Africa's people and landscape can be able to flourish. Our work is organized around 3 pillars in Africa. So one of them being vital landscape. So how do we contribute towards environmental restoration and protection? And then the other one being thriving and resilient cities. So there's so much around the growth of urban centers or urban settings in Africa, which has implication, for example, in terms of resilience, which has implication in terms of delivery of energy, for instance. So we are so keen on helping to support and shape how African cities they grow. And then finally, what we call the institution and economic transformation, which cuts across these 2 main pillars, and purely just looking at policy analysis, and then how can we be able to build the capacity of the institutions that are supposed to deliver on these 2 pillars so that they are well equipped to be in a position to definitely deliver on their mandates. we work across the three sectors you can see: subnational, national, and of course, regional stroke global level. So I guess getting into the real deal of the conversation today and helping just to set the context of energy poverty in Africa, that I think, as you can see on the first bullet there, is despite the critical role of energy in catalyzing economic development, it's unfortunate that we still have millions and millions of populations in sub-Saharan Africa who still don't have access to affordable, reliable, and clean energy, which is a global commitment that we all have. Access across the region stands at 35%. A majority of these, they actually found in the rural parts of the continent. And the challenge as it is, if we then don't do something quite fast, statistics demonstrate that by the time we get to 2030, 9 out of 10 people globally who will have no access to energy will actually be found in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think this is a premise behind which then our work is informed. But then also more important, I think you may realize from countries like Kenya, for instance, where, and quite a number of the countries in East Africa, some bit of North Africa, is that where even access to energy has been driven, or programs to promote access to energy have been driven pretty fast over the last couple of years, consumption still remains extremely low. And so I think on the one hand, as we also drive access to energy, the bigger question again is how do we drive demand for energy consumption and consumption of clean energy for that matter. The interventions so far in terms of promoting access to energy have largely focused on the supply side. What does that mean? Is development organizations, policymakers very keen on the suppliers of energy, clean energy interventions, but actually not also looking at what is the demand side, for instance, saying, or how can we be able to even catalyze demand for clean energy? Because then it's only after you actually catalyze demand that, for example, investors can be able to see there's increased demand for consumption of clean energy so that they can be able to come and invest. But I think only focusing on just promoting supply side without necessarily also looking at how do you catalyze demand, I think that's a missed opportunity, which as WRI, of course, we have been keen on. And then the other thing is, of course, again, promoting integrated planning and budgeting. And the reason for this, I think, from the years of experience that we have been in this sector, we have realized that increasingly different sectors are working in silos, which of course, again, has an impact on how then speedy deployment of clean energy interventions, and more specifically for the development sector, is done. And so we are quite keen on seeing how can we be able to drive integrated planning and budgeting so that we can be able to also again increase investment, but also at the same time uptake for clean energy for that matter. And finally, in terms of promoting reliability and cost for energy, especially for the poor and the vulnerable populations. So I guess a few of the challenges here that we see. So again, as I mentioned, is how do we consistently and sustainably build demand for clean energy so that energy entrepreneurs and investors can be in a position to actually see this demand and they can be able to respond to that demand. There's a growing uptake of clean energy in the commercial and industrial sector. But again, how then do we also promote efficiency within the commercial and industrial sector? So that again, it's not just broad consumption without again looking at efficiency, because again, efficiency for us, we believe has a greater piece to play in as far as also access and sustainability is concerned. Finance is critical for investment. Unfortunately, the pace at which finance is flowing in the region is significantly low. Looking at how much, for example, is required, or even comparing with the global trends in as far as finance for renewable energy is concerned, you see that where actually investment should be going, the flow remains significantly low. And so the question then is, how can we be able to help unlock investment both from international sources, but at the same time also in terms of local domestic resources? Of course, we also want to ensure that investment that is coming to Africa's energy sector is actually green, Also keeping in mind that one, there's an opportunity for Africa to leapfrog to clean energy sources for that matter. But I think also more important is that we also want to keep the commitment of clean development. I think there's somebody who has unmuted themselves. Thank you. Yeah. So looking at, again, how can we be able to influence the flow of green finance into Africa's development sector? Again, working with government development institutions to ensure that investment and planning is done in an integrated manner. And then, of course, doing convenings. And we are quite keen on ensuring that, for example, the lessons that we see, what is working, for example, in terms of unlocking finance, or what is working in terms of integrated energy planning, how can we be able to share these lessons? And so convening for us becomes quite a critical thing in the space that you work in. So here is a high level idea of what we are doing. So our work is actually organized. That is, in Africa, it's organized along these four pieces you can see. So the first one is building demand for clean energy investment. And in here, we are quite keen on providing data and analysis or analytics that can be able to help inform both in terms of showing where the opportunities are or the unmet demand for clean energy, that is. But at the same time, again, to help investors be in a position to see where there's actually opportunity for them to invest in promoting investment in renewable energy. The other one is on unlocking finance. And here we work, of course, with the local financial institutions, because again, we have a strong belief that in as much as we also want to unlock international finance, there's also a lot of resources available locally in local currency, which is another problem that affects the sector. And so how can we be able to work with the local financial institutions to help them build a capacity to establish, for example, renewable energy portfolios for financing clean energy investment. And at the same time, again, working with international sources, even including, for example, influencing Chinese investment into the clean energy sector. And then the other thing is we work very closely, or we are working very closely with distribution utilities and the regional power pools. And again, I think the conviction that we also have is for us to be able to achieve 100% clean energy access in a more sustainable manner, utilities are going to play a major role in the sector. The unfortunate part is a majority of African utilities are still faced with a lot of challenges, including, for example, financing, including efficiency. And so how can we be able to support them to be ready to actually become the utilities of the future? What are some of the business models that, for example, utilities can be able to apply with and collaborate, for example, with the distributed energy system players? And then, of course, finally, on the efficiency side of things. So I felt for this conversation, perhaps it would be important to just take you a bit deeper into one of the tools that we have been developing over the last couple of years. It's a geospatial tool for integrated energy planning. We call it Energy Access Explorer, which basically provides geospatial data and analysis, which is needed, of course, to help in terms of informing integrated energy planning, but at the same time, also not just about integrated energy planning, but also in terms of informing investors on where there are unmet demands and hence opportunities for investment. So we've been building this tool together with our partners in a couple of countries. That includes Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Zambia, Nigeria, and now getting into Ghana. And we do this tool, or we have been developing this tool very closely with governments, and more specifically, for example, the ministries of energy in these countries, investors who are interested in the energy space, again, in these countries, and other agencies or government agencies that play a critical role in the energy planning space. And this tool, I think, as I had mentioned before at the beginning, the beauty or the difference about this tool is that we provide data on energy demand on the one hand and energy supply data on the other hand. And the reason being, again, the conviction that we have is there is a lot of missing information and data in terms of energy that definitely is also needed to inform how supply is done or to inform how planning is done. And this tool treats both demand and supply data as equal. And the beauty that we again felt that this tool can be able to help is to reduce the over-reliance on GIS expertise, especially for the data users. And the reason being, again, most of the tools I think that are out there in the field, they require one to have GIS expertise, which is quite limiting, especially for planners. And so we wanted to come up with a tool that can easily be, that people, even those that don't have GIS expertise, they can easily be in a position to use and maneuver the tool to do the analysis and inform their planning and investment. You can be in a position to customize all these data. Again, as I mentioned, you can see at the top, we have data on energy demand, including, for example, demographics. And I'm going to be taking you through this tool in some more sense. So there's information on demographics, social and productive uses, where energy is needed, for example. And then on the supply side, which is down there, you can see we have data on energy resources, including, for example, the capacity for solar or solar irradiation, capacity for wind, hydro, including even small hydro power potential, etc. And then on the other side, you have data on energy infrastructure. So including, for example, distribution lines, where they are, how far they have reached in a country, and at the same time, again, mini grids. In the event that, for example, there are places with mini grids, you would be in a position then to access this data and see where mini grids have been installed. It's quite a lot, and so that's why we are getting in a few seconds. So here, when you remove whatever I've put up there in black, Energy Access Explorer, which enables integrated, I think before you get there. So on the left, you can be able to see the different kind of data sets that we have. So we have data on sensors, we have data on demand, and I think, I think I've already explained what demand is, but again, we're getting into that shortly. Then we have data on supply, and then other different sorts of data, which I think one can be in a position to know all these different data sets once you get into the tool. And then down there, you can be able to see all of them. What is now included if you want to analyze every single kind of data that is included there. So more specifically, getting into know what kind of data sets can you be in a position to see on the Energy Access Explorer. So in terms of demographics, you find data on population density. And then on socio-economic activities, you get data set on education facilities and healthcare facilities. I think what we have done so far is we have mapped out all the education facilities in these countries that I have mentioned, all the healthcare facilities in these countries, and the electrification status, so that then anybody can be able to see where, for example, do you have institutions that are not electrified, and hence be in a position then to be a demonstrator of potential areas where investment or needs to be done to promote access to energy. Then in terms of productive use, irrigated and rain-fed croplands, and then data on resource availability. We have data on global horizontal irrigation, wind speed magnitude, small-scale hydropower potential. And then for infrastructure, you have transmission and power generation data. You have data on distribution lines, mini grids where they exist, accessibility to cities again, especially for those who would want to consider supporting or investing in productive use of energy opportunities. I think accessibility to cities is a critical information for such kind of decision making. In terms of environment, we have protected areas, again, so that you can be in a position to see, for example, where we have national parks, and hence maybe in terms of, in terms of what kind of factors do you need to consider in making investment in those kind of places. And then also for finance, again, as I mentioned, we are quite keen on promoting access to finance. And so we have also mapped out where do we have all these financial institutions in these different places, so that then anyone can be in a position to actually see, do you have potential financing institutions that they can be able to reach out to as they design their energy access investment programs, for instance. And then the beauty is you can be in a position to do what we call customized high resolution multi-criteria analysis. So what that means is you can choose different sets of data and you overlay with one another. So for example, you can choose data on health facilities, and then you can overlay that, for example, with the distribution networks. And hence you can be in a position then to see where, for instance, we have facilities that are not electrified. If you have interest, for example, in supporting investment in electrification of healthcare facilities, or you can choose data on agriculture and then access to energy, for example, or what are some of the other renewable energy resources that, for instance, can be harnessed to promote access to electricity in some of those agriculturally rich places, but don't have energy. And hence, then you can be in a position to make informed decision on investment. This is the way it looks like. So, for example, this is a population. This is for education and healthcare facilities. This is for irrigated and rain-fed croplands. So you can be able to see the different kind of data sets that you can be able to overlay on each other to help you make your analysis, or what you're calling the multi-criteria analysis. So I guess that's so far in terms of the development of that tool. Of course, we haven't been doing this alone. We have done this in collaboration with different partners. Some of them, we have categorized them as data partners or government institutions or advisory institutions and funding partners. Considering, again, this is, I mean, building such a tool requires a lot of resources and efforts. And so we have done this in collaboration with so many different partners to be able to reach where we have reached so far. Of course, stakeholder engagement for us is quite key. It's central to this conversation. And the reason being, we don't want to build a tool that is not going to be useful or that is not going to be used by the stakeholders that we actually want them to make use of the tool to inform their decision making. And so right from the start, we start with consultations or consulting with the different stakeholders in the space so that they can be able then to tell us what are some of the factors that they would want to see or parameters that they would want to see integrated on the tool. What kind of data would they want to see? But also at the same time, especially for government institutions, is also because for us, we have been very keen to ensure that this kind of a tool is actually co-owned and co-administered with government institutions. So say, for example, the rural electrification authorities, because again, we believe that they are at the center of where policy and planning takes place. But at the same time, in terms of even investors, I think most of them, of course, would easily be in a position to identify with government or to go to government for advisory work. And so we have been quite keen on ensuring that this kind of a tool is hosted and co-administered with respective government institutions. And then for us, of course, becomes providing the technical knowledge and the technical expertise. So I guess that brings me to the end of the presentation. I'm so sorry I have rushed in the interest of time so that I can also be able to leave some space for questions and answer.
Benson, no rush for time with that. We can work with it. If you can, we can work within that 1 hour time frame. With all the hectic things that were going on here in the beginning, I'm getting very comfortable, sitting in related to what it is that you're doing, and with it being on the African continent. My background is as an educator, as a teacher, and one of the best lessons that I learned as a teacher was looking at life within the African continent and how people look out for each other and the size and scope of the continent. I have a map that I love here. You can't see it, but it's on my wall, and it's the map of Africa. And inside that map of Africa is China, the United States, and Europe, most of Europe, fitting into the continent itself. So the task that you have on the African continent, going from deserts to a lot of heavy rainfall and everything in between, it's a very, from the outside, it's a very complicated thing to look at from the outside and say, wow, how do they ever really deal with this to get up to everything that you find in other countries? But the unity that I've seen on the African continent with people working together to help each other, and a lot of the Africans that I've met over the years, though I've never been to the continent of Africa myself, it is on my agenda. And with some of the DRC people that are here, they're going to get me there, I think, pretty soon.
Wayne.
Yes.
Yes. So there are some questions that are.
I'm looking for them. I'm looking at. Oh, it's there now. Okay.
Yes.
When I started, they were not there. So I was starting to address things, and then to look at, they are there now. All right. Very good. All right. So I started in the direction that I did because I didn't see them there, other than my greeting for everybody to get started for today. So we do have some questions that are there now. You got my quick overview with things, Benson, but the idea of the size of the country and all the different applications related to energy, et cetera, that how you have to deal with the issues is huge. I don't know if you wanted to address back to that quickly for a second, or I can just jump right into some of the questions that are here. I don't know. So Benson, if you related to what I was saying, I'll put that aside then, and we'll look at some of the questions. I'm looking at one here right now for you. Have all countries in Africa been included in the Energy Access Explorer?
Sorry, I was on mute. That's why it took a bit long to respond. No, not all the countries have been included on the Energy Access Explorer. So we have 7 countries now, which is Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and then Zambia, Nigeria, and Ghana. Now, I think one of the other things also to mention is that our work is very, what we call demand-led, meaning that we don't want to just get into a country and start providing solutions that, for example, we don't think they are needed by the policymakers or the investors in that matter, for that matter. And so all the countries that I've mentioned here is actually where we felt there was need, and we had been requested by different policymakers, for example, from these countries, to be able to help them in terms of providing or building tools and platforms that can be in a position to provide the kind of data that is needed by the sector's stakeholders or the stakeholders in the sector. And so those are the countries that we have started with. Not to mean that, for example, we wouldn't go to other countries. Of course, if we get that kind of requests, certainly we would be more than interested in supporting other countries. And that's how Ghana, for example, just got in. Ghana is the latest one that we're getting into, actually should be in the next 1 month. But at the same time, again, is to appreciating that building this kind of a tool also requires significant amount of resources. I think data collection is not an easy thing. We all appreciate, in as much as we appreciate the significance of data, I think getting access to that data is not easy. So it takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. And so again, once we get requests from any country, the next thing that you also want to look for is who can be in a position then to provide us with the financial resources. So for now, it's those countries I've mentioned. But of course, if we get more requests and more financial assistance, we'll definitely be willing to get into other countries as well.
And as you're talking about that, I'm looking at a question here that came from Barry Hunsberger that I know, who's here on campus where we are. Whether this ties in exactly, there's a follow-up to where you are with that. Have all the countries in Africa been included in the Energy Access Explorer?
I guess that should be the one that I have just addressed, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, but that was all of them, or okay. Let me go to another one here. Give me a second here to find one here. Who is a question I have here, which was Barry's. I think maybe there's another one from Barry. Who is the WRI working for? Or is that's the question you just had? Let me see.
Who are we working for? I guess that's a very interesting question. So we work for everybody. I think that's the easiest way I would say. And the reason why I'm saying this is because we seek to collaborate with government institutions. So for example, in as far as the energy work is concerned, our first client, quote unquote, it's the Ministry of Energy. Those are the first institutions that we actually seek to work with. But and purely because from an energy planning perspective, that's the institution that we believe is more strategic for us to be able to work with and inform and support the integrated energy planning. But at the same time, we're also working with, for example, communities. So for example, most of the work that we are supporting in as far as energy access, real projects on the ground are concerned, they're targeted to benefit the poor and the vulnerable communities who have no access to energy. So I think on that side, you can be able to see communities at the center of it. In the same case, also investment institutions. So whether, for example, you're speaking about local financial institutions that like I mentioned, or impact investors who want to see where there's opportunity for them to invest in expanding access to energy. Again, we also collaborate with them in terms of then supporting them with the kind of data and analysis that can be able to inform their decision-making and investment decisions.
Okay, another question I'm looking at here from Ella Blanco, adding on to Lewis's question, what would be needed to spread your work further?
I think somebody was trying to say something. Okay. I think
Benson, go ahead, please.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess what would be needed to spread the work further, as I mentioned, I think one of them is collaborations, and collaborations in this case includes especially on data side. So on the one hand, of course, as much as I'm saying, in terms of resource needs, that is required in terms of expanding this piece of work, I think the other thing that we have also learned is access to data. For us to be in a position to develop this kind of a tool is not an easy thing. And so we are collaborating with all manner of institutions, including, for example, universities, which we also have strong conviction that they have a lot of data and information that, for example, is required to develop this kind of a tool. But also I think, so one is partnerships and collaborations in terms of data, but then also, of course, the other thing is in terms of resources that would be required to expand this kind of work beyond the countries that we are currently working in.
Okay. All right, thank you for that answer. Barry, you were ready to jump in there and add something related to the questions that you had here? Go ahead, Barry.
Oh, yeah. No, it was just, I was just wondering if the WRI was the marketing side of electrifying Africa with the data collection. I mean, is that what they're basically a marketing institution for getting everything out there?
No. So WRI, as I mentioned, we are basically a global think tank. But of course, again, we are partnering in this work. We are partnering with quite a number of different organizations. I'm not too sure which one exactly you have mentioned about, but of course, in our work, we collaborate with organizations like, even philanthropic institutions. We are collaborating with institutions like Sustainable Energy for All, which is the UN agency or the institution that was established by UN to promote sustainable energy access. We are collaborating also with organizations like Power for All, but we are not a marketing institution. So we are purely a research stroke, a think tank.
Okay. WRI Africa is new for most of us, maybe all of us here. And Rosalind had a question related to that, I think. And what is WRI in full? I think I missed that part.
WRI in full is World Resources Institute. I'm trying to see if there was anywhere. Yeah, but it's World Resources Institute. Oh my gosh.
Okay.
It's actually an American organization. I should have mentioned that from the onset.
Okay.
Yeah. It's headquartered here in DC. So actually, as we speak, I'm in DC right now, where I came for, oh, sorry. Looks like I don't have anywhere it's written in full. But yeah, it's World Resources Institute, an American organization, but with some serious global presence.
Okay. Anyone else with some questions? I think I've listed the ones that I'm able to see here.
Yeah, hi, it's Louis Conway here.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a question on, the financial aspect to, the financial information aspect to the energy access tool. Given that it's an American-based organization, and under, I think, the financial section of the access tool, you did mention Chinese funding. So I'm just wondering if there's kind of a geopolitical aspect to Chinese involvement in the program. How would that impact upon what you're trying to achieve in Africa?
Yeah, great question. I think the way I would easily answer that is two things. One, in as much as we are a global organization, we are an American organization, I think the other part is that we have a global presence. And so we have an office our regional office for Africa is in Ethiopia. But we have different country offices, like one in Kenya, one in DRC, one in Rwanda, quite a number of country programs. They have their own offices there. Now, the same case also with China. So China, we also have WRI China office there, whose mandate is mainly to engage with the government of China. And the reason why the collaboration that emerged between WRI China and WRI Africa is purely was informed by Chinese BRI program, Bridge Railway and Something Corporation. And looking at how much investment, for example, China has interest in investing around the world, and more specifically in Africa through their BRI program, we were quite convinced that this is not something that we would not want to engage with, especially in terms of influencing then how does China invest in this program. Purely from a greening perspective, that yes, as you invest in Africa, this is where money is actually needed, for example, in the energy space. But even for that, you also need to be mindful to ensure that you invest actually in green projects. And also not just for energy sector, it's not just about utility scale. There's so much demand within the decentralized energy space. And China also needs to look at how they can be able to invest in the decentralized space, not just within the utility scale space. So I guess, and the other thing, of course, is that for us, we're usually very neutral because our position on issues is purely informed by data and research. And we just want to produce that kind of data to inform policy decision making. And so once we do that kind of analysis, then we share with and we do very jointly with our Chinese office, who then share that kind of findings with the policymakers in China to basically inform how China should make the investment in the space in Africa. I hope that helps respond to your question, Louise.
Yeah, it does help. Yeah, it seems like a really complicated situation in terms of, I guess, the geopolitical context of the, the funding, going into Africa. And I think your role seems to be, you're trying to mediate some of these, geopolitical differences between the different interests. I guess a kind of a related question to that would be then, given that we have all these, there are major financial interests looking at Africa, the systems they're coming from, they'll have different perspectives on human rights. And, money always seems to come with, conditions. And I guess I'm just wondering how you cope with, ensuring that the money is how the money flows and how it's used adheres to international standards for transparency, for accountability. Is that somehow factored into the Energy Access Explorer? Transparency, accountability, respect for data privacy. You have a lot of data going on in your Energy Access Explorer, and there's a lot of issues globally now around data privacy, data governance, respect for data. I'm just wondering how that aspect of it is respected.
Yeah. Thank you. How do I answer? I think there's two parts into this question. So in terms of data governance issues, yes, that's something that we are definitely quite keen on. And I can tell you the truth, of course, it has also been one of the challenges, quote unquote, that we have faced in terms of also accessing some of this sensitive data, including even, for example, data from government. And so what we have done is that we have two different, in terms of providing data on the tool, we have two different approaches. There's what is easily available. As soon as you have access to internet, you can be able then to download different kind of data sets. But then there's some of those data that is still quite important in terms of informing decision-making, but it's sensitive. And so that we have provided on a password-protected version, so that then we have these conversations with whoever is the generator of that data or whoever has that data. And they say that we think this kind of data is a bit sensitive for us, but we would want to provide it to some of those very critical institutions so they can be able to see what data would be available here on the tool. But then for them to actually access that data, then they would have to request for permission, say from the Minister of Energy. And so they write an email that we see there's this kind of data that is available on the Energy Access Explorer. Could you kindly provide us then with that data? That's the way we have actually addressed the question about the data sensitivity and data governance related questions. Is that sufficient? I wouldn't quite say yes. And the one thing I should have mentioned from the onset is that, of course, the development of this tool is an ongoing process. So as we keep learning different or emerging concerns, emerging issues, emerging proposals, again, we see how can we be able to integrate them to improve on the tool. That's from the data governance side of things. Now, in terms of transparency and accountability, I don't think I would say we have provided any data on transparency and accountability on this tool. And we haven't reached there as far as the Energy Access Explorer is concerned. But I think this is quite an interesting conversation that I think we need to have with our governance center, because the one that you see here, one of our centers of excellence that looks at equity issues, it's actually both equity and governance. So I think it's something that I can be able to bring to the attention of the governance and equity center. But for now, I wouldn't say that we have any data that, for example, we can say provides that kind of transparency and accountability concerns or addresses.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much,
yeah.
Benson.
Okay, great. Ella has another quick question. Why and I had this too. Why the WRI? What drew you to this organization rather than another one?
That's quite an interesting question, and I don't know why. Oh, sorry, I don't know how to respond to it. But I think the way I would respond is this. So we are a non-government organization, but we define ourselves as a think tank. Now, the reason being, I think, and hence the response to the question on why, is because we felt there was a gap in terms of data, providing critical data and analysis for planning. And we felt that's where we actually bring in different value, or we add value rather, to what most of the other institutions could be doing in the development space, and more specifically, for instance, on the energy space. So for us, we are quite keen on data analysis and providing tools that, for example, policymakers require to help or to facilitate their planning and decision making.
Interesting. Okay.
I had a question.
Sure.
Yeah. First, I greatly enjoyed the talk, and this was quite amazing to me. My question was related to that, actually. Namely, you talked about demand as a driving factor to whatever you do as the countries you have chosen. To me, it seems that the demand is obvious to the entire continent in sub-Saharan Africa. So related to that, then my question is, what is the hindrance to scaling? And more importantly, what is it that is the requirement you have, namely the demand? What is that demand for you to move on to a particular country? So say I'm the Congo and I want it to be my country to be mapped out by the data system that you have. What are the steps, and what is that demand? Thank you.
No, very important question, Edmond. Thanks a lot. And just to mention, I think Congo has also featured in our conversations quite a lot. So in case you're actually referring to the fact that, I mean, Congo was not just a hypothetical example. I think just to mention is that Congo has featured quite a lot, because we also have a very strong program on restoration in Congo, and the nexus between restoration and energy has been coming out quite strongly. So I think Congo is definitely going to be one of the countries that is definitely featuring in our next list of considerations. However, going back to the question that you asked in terms of demand, I think the demand here is mainly, as I mentioned, from two key institutions. The primary one being the energy planning institutions, whether, for example, the Ministry of Energy or the Energy Regulatory Commissions. And reason being, as I mentioned, of course, the risk of us developing this kind of a tool and then it sits somewhere not being used by who are supposed to be the users of the tool is quite high. And so for us to be able to overcome that potential challenge, we are quite keen on making sure that the institutions that we think would find this tool useful, they're the ones that are actually supposed to then request for this kind of technical assistance from us. So I guess that's one of them. And then the other one, in terms of scaling, again, as I mentioned, is even if, for example, we got all the ministries of energy across sub-Saharan Africa requesting for this kind of a tool, of course, from a scaling perspective, that also requires now finances. And it's not an easy task in terms of building this tool. In a way, you have all the kind of data sets that we have integrated, for example, for Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, being developed for all the other countries. It's not an easy thing. In all honesty, I think I'll be correct to say that we started this process in 2019. So you can see between 2019 and now 2022, and I'm speaking about 7 countries, tells you about the magnitude of the work that is involved, and also the scale of investment that is required to be able to develop this. However, one step at a time, we believe we have very positive stories in terms of use cases from the tool to inform planning, to inform investment decision-making, etc. And so we are quite hopeful that with time, we're actually going to also scale this up across a number of other countries across the continent.
Okay, it's interesting. I don't think there are other questions that are in here that I missed, but I had something, Benson. I come from the world of education. Back in the 1970s, I was a teacher, a provincial American history teacher, and I got shocked by things that were happening, and ended up teaching world cultures and started to see the world in a different way. And in that process, I started to develop relationships with people from the African continent. And over time, there were so many things that I saw there related to how people on the continent work together, and in so many ways, I've been impressed by the people on the continent, and the people, that's a big thing. There's so many people that from where I saw it and where I was with it in the 1970s, and to hear you talk today related to all the new technology, et cetera, that's in there, it's a totally different world today. And for young people, and I'm always around young people, it keeps me young too. So in the process of being with them, I am constantly telling them that, there really is a better world for tomorrow, even though today looks pretty bad. And there are just so many things along the way, from how, for example, in Africa, with what you're doing, how well organized it is, and the business model that you have there, works for you with what it is that you're doing. So, like many other people that were listening to this today, very impressed with what you're doing. Very happy to see a lot of the good things that are happening on the African continent, and I will get there someday.
You're most welcome, Wayne. Anytime you're in Kenya, drop me a line, and I'll be more than happy to basically make sure that you have a very good stay in Nairobi. But just going back to what you've just mentioned, there's a lot of, so there are two parts here. I think there's Africa that is not known, and everything seems very dark for Africa, from the people, for example, who have not had an opportunity to visit and interact with Africa. I think that's one. But there's so much happening again in the same continent, especially from innovation perspective. I don't know that there's any Kenyan on this call. When I was reading the email, that the invitation to this session, there was a mention about a few participants, I think, drawn from Kenya. But the reason I was mentioning this is because one of the biggest innovation in the telephone or the telecommunication industry actually emerged from Kenya, mobile money transfer. We call it M-Pesa. And M-Pesa, an innovation from Kenya, from Africa for that matter, is revolutionizing how even access to energy is being made possible, how financial inclusion, even for the poor, can happen in real time, is revolutionizing how money transfer is actually happening globally, and even within and across Africa. So I guess there's so much happening, but unfortunately, I think it's still not yet known out there, or perhaps I think it's our marketing strategy that is still not working for Africa. But there's so much positive stories, positive innovations happening across the continent, and I would challenge and invite you to come and see for yourself. one day in Africa.
We're just about out of time. We could take one more question if anyone has one. I can always come up with a question. Anyone else?
Yeah, it's Louis here again. Yeah, I had a question on, you brought up the word challenges. Now, if you were to identify, say, a few countries in Africa that present the most challenging environments for you in which to kind of bring in your tool, your Energy Access Explorer, which would be the most challenging countries? Just maybe one or two countries. After all, the UN does talk about leave no one behind. So which countries, in terms of either being the poorest countries or the countries that are kind of unstable politically, which countries do you say would present the most challenges for your program?
I guess Somalia is one of them. It's my border country to the east. South Sudan, again, our border country to the west or northwest for that matter, to Kenya, that is. So Somalia, South Sudan, we have a few countries again in the West Africa or Central Africa, West Africa, that side. I think politically would present some bit of challenges because again, as I mentioned, unfortunately, I think part of the limitation of our work, this kind of work, again, the fact that it's demand-led. So meaning that you also have to have strong governance systems in place, clear demand or articulation of the direction. And so this tool then comes in to complement what they're doing. I think some of these countries, they're not yet there. Again, I guess, even for Congo, with all due respect, Congo is also another country where even in terms of energy poverty, for example, is still high. And so seeing how we can be able to support them, for example, with kind of data that can inform the investment and policy planning becomes quite critical. So there are quite a number of them that I can be able to map out for you. But yeah, you requested for 2. I've given 3.
How about Zimbabwe? Is that a country you'd be looking at in terms of kind of a country you'd be interested in providing your services to?
We don't have any ongoing work actually. Again, which is another factor. So we wouldn't want to go to a country where we do not have ongoing programs. Because in all honesty, I think the logistical part of coordinating all these efforts, it's not an easy one. So Zimbabwe, we don't have anything ongoing as we speak, which definitely would be a potential challenge to us deciding to enter into Zimbabwe.
Okay, thank you.
Not at all.
Well, Benson, thanks again very much for that. As a former teacher dealing with African culture, etc., one of the countries there that I admired the most with things that we've done with the young people that we've worked with has been in Kenya. But it's a continental wide, it's a continental application for things with all the differences and all that are there. It's one of the most interesting places in the world to visit and learn about. And the complexity is not the right word, but just the interest and energy that I find there related to people from the continent, from all kinds of different backgrounds, is something that over the years has really caught my interest and has had a very big impression on me. So it's on my list to get there sometime.
You're most welcome.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Benson, for that very